Omega Speedmaster. Is it worth it? Men's Swiss Watch Review. There are a handful of great names in watchmaking that offer unique and world-renowned timepieces. Today, we'll be looking at one of the most iconic timepieces from a famed Swiss watchmaker, namely the Speedmaster from Omega. To examine what it's made of, how it works, and ultimately ask the question, is it worth it? Even though the watch is among our favorites, our review will be honest and unbiased. Also, this is not sponsored. La General Watch Company was founded in 1848 by Louis Brandt. They incorporated the name Omega in 1903, becoming Louis Brandt at Frere Omega Watch and Company when they became a subsidiary of this watch group in 1982. They officially changed their name to Omega SA. But Omega isn't content just to sit among these other watchmakers. In 1892, founder Louis Brandt created the first minute repeating wristwatch in collaboration with Audemars Piguet. The British Royal Flying Corps chose Omega as the timekeeper for its combat units in 1917. The Olympics have utilized Omega as the official timekeeper since 1932. The British military was still using Omega in the 1940s during World War II. You can see Tom Hardy's character, Farrier, uses Omega timepiece to calculate how much flying time he had left in the movie Dunkirk. And Omega has been on the wrist of everyone's favorite secret agent, James Bond, since 1995. Perhaps Omega's greatest achievement happened in 1969 by putting the first watch on the moon. And which watch did it? None other than the Omega Speedmaster. Interestingly, the Speedmaster was never created for lunar voyages. It actually joined the Omega lineup in 1957 as a racing chronograph, specifically the Model 2915-1. A chronograph is a type of watch which features smaller sub-dials within the larger main dial of the watch. The primary function is to keep a record of elapsed time versus the actual time of day. The chronograph's Tag Heuer scale can also be used to calculate the speed of a moving object. So, the easiest way to think of a chronograph is like a stopwatch. Of course, chronographs can also incorporate other features known as complications. Those complications can include the day, the phase of the moon, and many others. The Speedmaster's design followed the simple, yet functional chronographs of the 1920s and 30s. The Speedmaster's name was given to complement Omega's already established Seamaster and Railmaster collections. These original racing chronographs were powered by a manual wind movement, which means unlike a quartz or an automatic movement, the Speedmaster has to be wound by hand on a regular basis to keep time. Being manual wind allows the watch to not lose any function in low gravity. Because automatic watches utilize the pull of gravity on the rotor to wind the watch, this wouldn't be functional in space. And quartz watches weren't even available until 1969. Even though the Speedmaster is famous for being the moon watch, it actually went into space several years earlier. It journeyed to space on the wrist of astronaut Walter Schirra on the 1962 MA8 mission. The Speedmaster worn was Schirra's personal Omega CK 2998. Although Schirra's watch performed well, it didn't stop NASA from wanting to make sure that they could rely on the Speedmaster for future missions. NASA set rigorous testing for all watches that they were considering to be the moon watch. This included being able to cope in temperatures as extreme as 200 degrees Fahrenheit to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. That's roughly 93 degrees Celsius to negative 18 degrees Celsius. Watches had to pass both high and low pressure tests and a test to ensure function in a pure oxygen atmosphere with no seals breaking. Watches submitted also had to be shockproof and anti-magnetic. All dials and numbers had to be legible in low light conditions, which makes sense for a dark spacecraft. The crystalline case had to be anti-reflective, which is why Omega chose a satin, finished steel case. And, of course, timekeeping accuracy was measured. Out of the short list of selected watches, both the Longines Wittnauer and the Rolex Cosmograph both failed testing, which means on June 1, 1965, the Omega Speedmaster was chosen, a watch that was certified for manned space missions. This means, to this day, Omega is likely NASA's longest consistent supplier. As a fun fact, Hamilton actually submitted a pocket watch for consideration. Needless to say, the idea of a pocket watch floating around made them immediately disqualified. In 1969, the Speedmaster was on the wrist of the Apollo 11 crew. who were on their way to the moon. Due to a malfunction on an electronic timer, Neil Armstrong actually opted to keep his watch in the spacecraft as backup. However, Buzz Aldrin opted to wear his Speedmaster as he journeyed out of the spacecraft and onto the moon. Buzz, by the way, is actually a self-professed watch guy. 1 year later, in 1970, the Speedmaster once again journeyed into space on the Apollo 13 mission. Famously, a ruptured oxygen tank jeopardized the descent journey, which gave us everyone's favorite line when something goes wrong. Houston, we have a problem. Truly, the Speedmaster represents an incredible chapter in watchmaking and NASA's history. Omega provides a ton of information on their website, including a downloadable PDF guide, which you'll see is quite useful because there are so many variants in the Speedmaster line. There are models such as the Speedmaster Racing line, which pays homage to the timepieces racing routes, the Speedmaster 38, which showcases some smaller Speedmasters, and there are different editions of the Moonwatch, including the dark side of the moon, white side of the moon, and many more.